The word Palaeozoic means ancient life. The Palaeozoic era includes 6 geological periods, encompassing nearly 300 million years of Earth history. It tells the story of the appearance of shelly life and the gradual conquest by plants and animals of the land. Great Britain's Palaeozoic rocks include the fold mountain rocks that form the backbone of England. Some of those mountain ranges are quite formidable and are used to train some of Britain's toughest soldiers. The geology is hard as well. Many of the older rock layers were tilted, folded in complex ways, metamorphosed by heat and pressure, and intruded by molten rocks. In Australia, we have the same pattern. Our Palaeozoic rocks are found in our old fold mountains, such as our eastern Great Dividing Range. We have tilting, folding, granite intrusions, and the metamorphism or change of rocks by heat and pressure. Sir Roderick Impey Murchison was a Scottish soldier who fought with Wellington against Napoleon. After 8 years, he left the army and turned his attention to geology, exploring many parts of Britain and the world in general. He was particularly impressed with the rock sequences in the Russian Ural Mountains and named these rocks the Permian period in 1841 after the old kingdom of Permia in northern Russia. This is a memorial tablet to our rod in the city of Perm. The Russian sequence contains a number of toothy Permian reptile and amphibian fossils to scare the kiddies with on the dark Russian winter nights. The Americans have some nice Permian munches as well. We find our Permian rocks in a number of flat-lying sedimentary basins that rest on older folded rocks. Some of the layers were formed when the sea invaded, and others were formed in freshwater streams and swamps. These marine rocks at Raymond Terrace were formed under the sea, and are full of brachiopods that lived in the mud and filtered plankton from the water. Fossils in the Permian rocks can be quite abundant. Coal seams in Australia formed later than in Europe. Plants accumulated in swamps. Burial under mud squashed the plants, turning them to black carbon coal chemicals. The main plant species are fragile seed ferns, a primitive conifer. The leaves are called Glossopteris and the roots Vertebraria. This is the stem of the plant. Often whole stumps are buried in seat earths under the seams and replaced by hard quartz, forming petrified wood. One of these is real wood and one is petrified. Can you pick which is which? Australia's black coal is low in sulphur and eagerly sought after by an overpopulated and energy-hungry world. Coal ships line up all along our eastern coast, and some come to grief. The Bulleye seam at Coalcliff marks the top of the Permian geological period. There are many underground mines centred around Wollongong and dozens of coal seams. The Katoomba mine is now closed. You may have travelled on its old railway line, the Mountain Devil. Newcastle also has many coal seams that extend westwards to Singleton and Gunnedah. The huge open-cut pits are dirty and dusty, emitting dangerous nitrogen dioxide gas during blasting. Coal mining is never good for the health. Quality science is needed to minimise the health and environmental risks. The year is 1967, and paleontologist Robin Wass stands astride a vertical Carboniferous limestone ridge at Scone in New South Wales. He was one of the first to notice that the Permian rocks at Bowen in Queensland contained fossils identical to those in the Sydney Basin. The peer reviewers, as usual, were critical, but coal was discovered below the surface by American geologists. Queensland now has a massive open-cut coal industry, with the world wanting a slice of the action. Is it good or bad? Your generation will learn the answer to that. The word Carboniferous means coal-bearing. Most of the northern hemisphere's coal deposits were formed at that time. Smith was able to explore lots of these rocks in Britain. At the base of the sequence, there are limestones that store carbon in the form of calcium carbonate and form under the sea. These limestones can dissolve under younger acidic soils, forming unusual rock surfaces that we call karst terranes. They can form deep caves underground that you can fall into if you are not careful. In the Midlands of England, there was a sandstone called the Millstone Grit. This was used by my ancestors to grind up grain to flour and for sharpening metal tools and blades. At the top of the Carboniferous sequence, the Earth's climate turned cold. The sea level dropped and huge swamps became common. A new type of vegetation appeared. The big tree fern, Lepidodendron, was common. It was able to store lots of carbon in its bark as a new brown chemical called lignin, which resisted rotting. The Australian Carboniferous was glaciated, so we did not form the coal seams until later in the Permian period. My collection of Carboniferous fossils includes a squid-like belemnite from Vasey, seed ferns near Seaham, gastropods from Foster, and some small horn corals from Scone. The dawn of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, Europe and America demanded increasing amounts of fuel. Forests were quickly depleted and the poor were forced down the appalling coal pits, where they died from rock falls, explosions, lung disease and tuberculosis. Sometimes they are even killed for striking. The burning of high sulphur coals came to a head in 4 days of temperature inversion in London in 1952. 4,000 died and 100,000 people became ill. A Clean Air Act followed in 1956. The use of coal was minimised. The acid rain was even killing the forests of Europe. Britain and Europe turned to nuclear power to protect their good citizens. Now the coal burning experiment restarts on a massive scale in China and India. Smog blankets China and travels east. 1 million deaths a year is conservative. In Indonesia, poor farmers burn the peat bogs of Kalimantan. The haze travels east. In my view, we should embrace all non-coal and wood-burning energy alternatives and build our future as an exporter of these clean energies. The need is absolutely urgent. Bill Smith called the Devonian rocks of Britain by their Welsh name, Red Rub. The Cambridge geology professor and theologian, Adam Sedgwick, was more genteel. He named the rocks after the county of Devon in southeast of England. Sedgwick was the man who taught Charles Darwin geology, as well as teaching Australia's father of geology, the Reverend William Branwhite Clark. Another name for the Devonian rock layers is the Old Red Sandstone. This outcrops to the north of Scotland and the Orkney Islands. The red is caused by the presence of iron oxide in its valence 3 state. The sandstones have yielded the fossils of many primitive fish, so the Devonian is best known as the Age of Fishes. There are some land plants and amphibians adapting to the land to go after them. In Australia, I have fond memories of exploring the Devonian. There was a huge barrier reef extending from Yass north to Jenolan, with lots of fossil corals and world-famous caves. The caves form as acidic groundwater dissolves out the reactive calcium carbonate. The caves are very old and often preserve the remains of animals that fall into them. Smith chose the name Killis for his second oldest rock layer. It is an old Cornish word for the metamorphic rocks found near granites. His Killis metamorphic rocks outcrop mostly in Wales in the west of the British Isles, as well as parts of the Midlands, Scotland and Cornwall. These rocks were the source of much of Britain's ancient wealth, and was one of the reasons why Britain was invaded so many times. During mountain building activities, granite and other magmas can form. When molten magma invades older rocks, metallic minerals such as tin, copper, zinc, lead and even gold can concentrate. Britain's metalworking tradition goes back over 4,000 years and was the source of its wealth and modern technology. At one stage it was the source of half the world's tin, the metal the Romans needed to harden copper to make their bronze armour. The subdivision of Smith's Kylus into 3 geologic periods was the work of his successors who would honour him. It is all based on the ancient map of Wales. The Reverend Sedgwick chose Cambrian after Cumbria, the old name for Wales. Birmingham professor Charles Lapworth named the Ordovician after the northern Welsh Ordovices tribe, and our old mate Murchison named the Silurian after the southern Welsh tribe, the Siluries. The world of 600 million years ago is still being studied using rare fossils preserved in the Ediacaran Hills of South Australia. Those creatures were soft-bodied and multicellular, and that is all that we can be certain about them. The beginning of the Cambrian geological period, 542 million years ago, is sometimes called the Cambrian explosion. It is probable that the atmosphere and seas changed. Certainly life changed. Life forms appeared with shells, body armour, legs and even eyes. All the action was in the seas. My favourites were the trilobites, the most successful of extinct animals that were able to survive all the trials and tribulations of the world until they died out in the Permian mass extinction. Trilobites were arthropods, having a tough external skeleton, a segmented body and jointed legs. They were related to modern-day crabs and insects. Their armour was made of tough chitin, which molted as they grew in size. They evolved to inhabit all parts of the ocean. Some tiny swimmers hunted down plankton at the surface of the seas. Most crawled the sea floor, some hunting down small animals and worms by burrowing into the sediment. Others lived like modern-day fiddler crabs, scraping and eating algae and dead material. All told, there were 20,000 species, dominating the Cambrian and Ordovician periods. Their bodies had 3 parts, a head shield, a tail shield, and a centre part with legs. They also had complex eyes, spines and feelers. Other major groups of animals were evolving in the seas during the Cambrian explosion. Reef-building corals would be abundant in the Ordovician and Silurian periods, feeding on plankton and extracting calcium carbonate from the seawater to build their skeletons. These particular species were abundant in southern New South Wales. Shelly molluscs appeared in the Cambrian, but would be overshadowed by their rival filter feeders, the brachiopods. New predators appeared: squid-like belemnites and eurypterids or sea scorpions. They would feed on trilobites and other smaller creatures. In the Silurian in Victoria, the first organised land plants are found in fossil form. They grew some metres high and are called Barraguanaceae after a pioneering Aussie geologist, William Barraguanath. Primitive jawless fish begin to terrorise the oceans in the Ordovician. A group of stinging animals, called the graptolites, are very useful for dating Ordovician and Silurian rock layers. They hung suspended from floats like bluebottles, feeding on plankton in the ancient seas. When they died, the stingers fell to the bottom and were preserved in the deeper water layers. This one I collected from Yass. They died out in the Carboniferous period. If you are wondering what our most famous Cambrian rock looks like, just visit Uluru, a vertically dipping sandstone. The 3 geologic periods of Smith's Palaeozoic are still being studied by a handful of dedicated research geologists. The developing story is one of the emergence of shelly life within our oceans and gradually increasing levels of oxygen within the atmosphere. The plants and animals within the seas underwent a series of dramatic transformations, leading first to shelly invertebrates, then finally to the first marine animals with backbones, the fish. Right throughout the Cambrian, Ordovician and Silurian periods, the land was bare and colonised only by the most primitive of life forms. The land would have contributed little to atmospheric oxygen. At the top of the Silurian period, the appearance of the first small land plants would eventually lead to the massive planet-transforming forests of the Carboniferous period. There is still much that we do not know about the Palaeozoic. Why did the seas change so much in the Cambrian? The answer may well have been changes to the smallest of creatures. And what were the causes of the repeated extinction events which followed? We know so little about our planetary past and how our planet, solar system, atmosphere and oceans work. The most important questions of our time remain. What will be the effect of returning so much fossil carbon to our atmosphere? How will our megacities adapt when that fuel runs out? What will be the effect on our climate and soils of the massive removal of the world's tall forests? The first country to find out will be the desert continent with the thinnest, most infertile soils, Australia.